What would you do if you came back from serving your country overseas, only to find strangers living in your home? Because your HOA sold it without your permission, Quentin Ralston had been gone for 11 months. 11 months of dust, sand, and orders barked across the other side of the world when the plane touched down at Dallas-Fort Worth. He let out a breath he hadn't, realized he was holding home, finally home. He had pictured this moment over and over. The drive west, the familiar stretch of road toward Weatherford, the site of his ranch sitting under the wide Texas sky. His father's old porch, swing the oak tree he used to climb as a boy, the barn that still smelled faintly of hay, all of it waiting for him. But when his truck pulled into the driveway that late afternoon, something stopped him cold. There was a minivan parked where his Chevy usually sat, children's bikes leaned against the fence. And through the front window of his ranch house, the house he had grown up in, he saw curtains he didn't recognize, and toys scattered on the floor. His first thought was that he had the wrong place. But that was impossible. Every inch of the property was etched into his memory. This was his land. His family's land. Yet strangers were living in it. Quentin killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. A woman opened the door. She had a toddler on her hip and looked startled as though she'd just seen a ghost. "Can I help you?" she asked. Quentin straightened his posture, still in uniform, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "This is my house. Who are you?" The woman's grip tightened around the child. "I think you're mistaken. We bought this house 6 months ago from the HOA. The words hit him like a punch. The HOA, his stomach knotted. He had paid every bill before leaving. His mortgage was up to date. Taxes cleared. He had arranged everything. So nothing could possibly go wrong while he was deployed, and yet here he was standing on the gravel drive, watching a stranger cradle a child in his living room. "I'm not mistaken," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "My name is Quentin Ralston. This property has been in my family. For 3 generations, I didn't sell it, and I sure as hell didn't authorize anyone else to." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we have the paperwork. We paid for it. If you've got a problem, you'll need to take it up with the HOA. That's all I can tell you." Quentin felt heat rise in his chest. He had stared down armed men in hostile villages, but nothing prepared him for the quiet. Theft of his home, he turned back toward his truck, his mind racing the HOA. That meant Sylvia Brenner. Sylvia had been the president of the Homeowners Association for years. She was known for her clipped tone, her ironclad grip on the neighborhood, and her endless stream of fines and letters. She once cited Quentin for leaving his truck parked on the grass overnight. He remembered his father muttering that. Sylvia treated the subdivision like her personal kingdom. Now it seemed she had gone further than anyone imagined. As Quentin drove away, the world outside his window, blurred memories of his father resurfaced. The man teaching him to mend a fence, to break a horse, to value the land because it's the one thing they can't make more of. His father had fought hard to keep the ranch through recessions and hard winters, and now, while Quentin had been overseas serving his country, someone had taken it with the stroke of a pen. He pulled into a gas station on the edge of town and sat for a long moment staring at the wheel. His hands trembled. He dialed the number for an old friend, Luis Navarro, a local sheriff's deputy who'd grown up 2 miles down the road. "Ralston, you back?" Louise's voice cracked with surprise. "I'm back," Quentin said. "And apparently I don't have a house anymore." Louise was quiet for a beat. "What are you talking about?" "The HOA sold my ranch. There's a family living in it. Right now they said they bought it through Brenner Jesus." Louise muttered, "You need to come by the station, bring whatever paperwork you've got. We'll sort this out. Don't go confronting anyone. Right now, you don't want to end up in handcuffs the day you get home." Quentin managed a dry laugh. "But there was no humor in it, handcuffs. I just want my house back, I know. But trust me, this is bigger than it looks. If Brenna did this once, she's done it before. Sit tight, we'll figure it out." Quentin hung up and leaned back in the seat. The neon glow of the gas station sign flickered against the hood of his truck. His mind swirled with disbelief, anger, and something colder determination. They had taken his home. But they hadn't counted on him coming back to fight. But what Quentin didn't realize yet was that the ranch was only the beginning. The HOA had been playing a much larger game, and he was about to uncover all of it. The next morning, Quentin walked into the HOA office in Weatherford, a squat brick building tucked between a dental clinic and a feed supply store. He still wore his uniform, partly because he hadn't had time to change, partly because he wanted Sylvia Brenner to see it. To see him, the lobby was quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of old carpet. And coffee burned hours ago. Behind the counter sat a receptionist who barely looked up from her screen. "I need to see Sylvia. Quentin said she's in a meeting," the woman replied, clicking at her keyboard. Then tell her Staff Sergeant Quentin Ralston is here about the ranch she sold out from under me. That got the woman's attention. Her eyes flicked up wide before she disappeared down the hall a minute later. Sylvia herself appeared. She was exactly as he remembered, sharp-suit, silver hair pulled tight. Glasses perched low on her nose at 61, she carried herself like a queen, surveying her subjects while she said, folding her arms, "I wondered when you'd be back." "You sold my ranch," Quentin said flatly. Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin smile. "Correction, the HOA sold it after you failed to address repeated violations. And delinquent dues, you abandoned the property, Sergeant. The board had no choice." Quentin stepped closer. "I didn't abandon anything. I was deployed. Federal law protects service members from exactly this kind of stunt. And I paid every cent before I left her." Smile didn't falter. "That's not what our records show." "You forged something, then?" Quentin snapped. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably. Behind the counter, Sylvia held up a manicured hand. "I suggest you calm yourself. Raising your voice won't change the fact that you lost that property months ago. Perhaps you should take it up with your lawyers, instead of harassing me." Quentin's jaw clenched, but he forced his voice steady. "Don't worry, I will." He turned on his heel and walked out, his boots echoing against the tile floor outside. The Texas sun beat down on his shoulders for the first time since he landed. He realized just how deep this mess ran. Sylvia wasn't flustered, she was confident, too confident. She had done this before. Later that afternoon, Quentin met Louis Navarro at the sheriff's office. Louis poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the desk. "You were right," Louise said. "I checked the county clerk's office. There's a recorded transfer on your property signed off by the HOA board and filed like it was legitimate, but here's the kicker. Your signature isn't on anything. They pushed it through as a lien foreclosure. A lien on what, according to their claim? Unpaid dues and repeated violations." Louis shook his head. "Thing is, the amounts don't add up. They're inflated, way inflated, and your payments. I found the receipts in the county records. You are current." Quentin slammed his fist against the table. "So they stole it pretty much, and if they did it to you, I guarantee you're not the first. We've had a couple complaints over the years about Brenner's board, but nothing stuck. People either settled or walked away." Quentin leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Not this time," Louise studied him. "I know you're angry, you've got every right, but you need to handle this smart. Go through the Army's legal channels. You're covered under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. If you push this the right way, you'll not only get your ranch back, you'll burn their whole scheme down." Quentin nodded. "Then that's what I'll do." That evening, he sat at his sister's kitchen table in Mineral Wells. Emma Ralston, 5 years older, stubborn as a mule, had made a pot of chili and refused to let him talk. Until he'd eaten at least one bowl, they sold Daddy's land. She finally set her spoon, clattering against the bowl over my dead body. "I'm getting it back," Quentin said, "and I'm going to make sure they can't pull this on anyone else." Emma's eyes burned good, because if Daddy were alive, he'd be down there himself flipping tables. They both laughed, the sound rough and tired, but it broke the tension. Quentin pulled a folder from his duffel. Every receipt, letter, and notice he'd kept before deployment, he spread them across the table. "Army JAG office will have my back," he said. "And once they dig into this, Sylvia's kingdom is going to crumble." Emma tapped one of the receipts. "You better believe it, and when you're done, I want to watch her carry her boxes out of that office." Quentin smiled, though his stomach still churned. He knew this wasn't going to be simple. Sylvia had power connections and years of practice, but he had something she didn't count on. He came back, but even as Quentin prepared for a legal fight, whispers began to surface. Other families claiming their homes had been stripped away just like his, and soon the scandal was about to explode. Far beyond one ranch in Texas, 2 days later, Quentin walked into the Judge Advocate General's office. At Fort Cavazos, the building buzzed with the low rumble of printers' phones and clipped conversations between soldiers in uniform. And lawyers in pressed suits, he carried his folder under his arm like a weapon. A captain with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor introduced herself as Captain Renee Whitfield. She motioned for Quentin to sit and flipped through his paperwork. "You kept good records," she said. "Scanning the receipts, that helps. From what I see, this falls under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. It's designed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse while you're deployed, so I'm covered." Quentin asked, "Legally, yes, but cases like this can drag. HOAs often think they're untouchable. They count on service members being too far away or too tired to fight. You're in a good position, though. You're back, you've got documentation, and if their records don't line up, they're in trouble." Quentin leaned forward. "Trouble isn't enough. They took my home, my father's land. I want them held accountable." Captain Whitfield studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If there's a pattern, we'll find it, and if it's fraud, they'll answer for it." That night, Quentin sat alone in his motel room off I-20. Staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him, sleep didn't come. His mind replayed the woman at his front door. Her voice firm but uneasy as she claimed ownership of his home. He didn't blame her. She was another pawn in Sylvia's game. Still, the image burned in his head the next morning. Louise called. "You're not going to believe this." Louise said, "We've had 3 more complaints since you showed up." Families saying the HOA forced sales over supposed unpaid dues. Same story every time, fees piling up out of nowhere. Then suddenly their house is gone. Quentin gripped the phone names I can get you to right now. Franklin Ortega on Mesquite Drive and the Holbrooks on Ridgeway both lost their places in the past year. "You want to talk to them?" "I do." Quentin said, "Set it up that afternoon." He met Franklin Ortega at a diner in town. Franklin was in his 50s with grease under his nails. From years working as a mechanic, he nursed a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "They said I owed them $10,000 in dues," Franklin muttered. 10 grand. "I've lived in that house 20 years, never missed a payment, but they said I was late, fees piled on interest, penalties. I couldn't keep up. One day a notice shows up on the door. 2 months later, the place is gone." "Sold to who?" Quentin asked. Franklin shook his head. "Some couple from Dallas paid cash." Real quiet, like it was all lined up in advance. Quentin felt his stomach. It was too clean. Too rehearsed that evening. He sat across from the Holbrooks in their cramped apartment on the edge of town. The couple, both retired teachers, looked worn down. "They told us the same thing." Mrs. Holbrook said softly that we'd violated lawn maintenance rules too many times. That we owed for repairs we never requested. Next thing we know, we're standing in front of a judge who says the HOA has the right to foreclose. We didn't even understand what was happening. Until it was done, her husband's hands trembled as he added, "We didn't have the money to fight it. We thought maybe it was just us, that we'd done something wrong." Quentin shook his head. "It wasn't you. It's them, and I promise you it's going to come out." The Holbrooks looked at him with tired, skeptical eyes, but something flickered there, hope later in his truck. Quentin gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. Sylvia wasn't just ruthless. She was running a racket. She and her board had built a machine that chewed through people's lives and spit them out, and somehow they'd convinced the courts to look the other way, but now with the army involved. That machine had a wrench in its gears. He pulled out his phone and texted Louise. "This isn't just my fight, it's everyone's. We're going after them," Louise replied a minute later. "Then buckle up, brother, because once you start, there's no turning back." But what neither of them knew was that Sylvia already sensed the walls closing in, and she was prepared to fight back. In ways Quentin couldn't yet imagine, Sylvia Brenner wasn't the type to panic. She had been steering the HOA board for nearly 2 decades, and in that time she had built a reputation for being untouchable. But the name Ralston had always carried weight in Weatherford. Quentin's father had been respected. And now his son was stirring things up. Word spread fast, too fast. And Sylvia knew the moment whispers reached the Army's legal offices, her tidy operation would start looking a lot less tidy. Inside her home, a sprawling brick house on a cul-de-sac polished to perfection, Sylvia called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. 4 other members gathered around her dining table, stacks of papers and ledgers in front of them. "We have a problem," Sylvia said, adjusting her glasses. "Staff Sergeant Ralston has returned. He's already made contact with local law enforcement and the JAG office." One of the board members, a wiry man named Curtis Doyle, shifted uneasily. "Can't we just return the property? Call it a mistake." Sylvia's glare silenced him. "A mistake if we reverse one. The others collapse. Do you want to explain to the dozen families who bought those homes that their deeds are worthless? Do you want lawsuits crawling over us from every direction?" A heavy silence fell. Another board member, Cheryl Masters, spoke next. "Then what's the plan?" "We tighten ranks," Sylvia said firmly. "Every document is in order. Every sale filed correctly with the county clerk. If they accuse us of fraud, we point to the records. As long as we're united, there's nothing they can do." Curtis muttered, "Unless someone talks." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. No one talks. Meanwhile, Quentin wasn't sitting idle. Captain Renee Whitfield had already filed motions to halt further HOA foreclosures pending investigation. She explained to Quentin that the Army's intervention would carry weight in federal court. Still, it wasn't just about law, it was about perception. The more families stepped forward, the harder it would be for Sylvia to paint him as an outlier. Louise called again late one evening. "Ralston, you stirred a hornet's nest. People are coming out of the woodwork. I've got 6 new names. Folks who say they got bullied out of their homes, some too scared to go public, but they'll talk to you privately." Quentin rubbed his temples, scared of what Louise lowered his voice. "Of Brenna. She's got pull. People say she threatened them with liens, fines, even lawsuits if they spoke up. One guy claims his truck was mysteriously vandalized after he complained at a meeting. Quentin's blood boiled. Then we'll give them a reason not to be afraid." The next day he met with Franklin Ortega again. This time joined by 2 other displaced homeowners in the back room of the diner. The smell of fried food and coffee lingered in the air. As they huddled over their cups, they can't keep getting away with it, Franklin said, his voice low. But people need to see someone standing up to them. Most of us just thought we didn't have a chance. Quentin leaned in. You do now, the army's involved. This isn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. It's federal. If you're willing to give statements, you'll have protection, one of the others. A woman named Patrice Nolan wrung her hands nervously. I'm scared, Quentin. My husband's health isn't good. We can't afford more stress, more fighting. Quentin softened his tone. I get it. I really do. But think about what they took from you. Think about the next family they'll do it to. If no one says anything, if we speak up together, they can't silence us all. Patricia's eyes glistened, but she nodded slowly. All right, I'll talk later that night. Quentin found himself back in his truck, staring at the lights of the ranch from a distance. The family inside had left their porch light glowing. He wondered if they had any idea what kind of storm they were sitting in the middle of. They weren't villains in this story, they were victims too. Tricked into buying stolen property, still the sight made Quentin's chest ache. That was supposed to be his home, his father's porch swing, his family's legacy. Back in her house, Sylvia received a phone call from one of her contacts at the county office. The army filed an injunction today, the voice told her. You'll need to prepare. Sylvia's lips thinned. Let them come, they won't find what they're looking for. But for the first time in years, Sylvia felt a crack in her armor. She poured herself a glass of wine. Her hand trembling ever so slightly, she had thought she could outmaneuver anyone. She hadn't counted on a soldier coming home, angry with the law on his side. But as Quentin gathered allies, Sylvia quietly began plotting her own counterattack, one that threatened to drag the entire neighborhood into chaos. Quentin sat at the long oak table inside the Parker County Courthouse, papers spread in front of him. Captain Whitfield had arranged the meeting. And now he found himself surrounded by homeowners who'd all been burned by Sylvia's HOA. Some came with folders of letters and notices, others only had their stories etched into tired faces. Captain Whitfield opened the session. We're here to document every incident tied to the HOA's foreclosures. I need each of you to speak clearly and truthfully. The more consistent your accounts, the stronger the case will be. One by one, the voices filled the room. Franklin Ortega recounted inflated dues and surprise violations. Patrice Nolan explained how her family was cited for supposed landscaping issues when their lawn was immaculate. The Holbrooks described being blindsided in court, too overwhelmed to defend themselves. As each testimony stacked up, Quentin felt his anger harden into something sharper. Purpose. When it was his turn, he spoke quietly but firmly. I was serving in Kuwait when my ranch was taken. I paid every bill before I left. They claimed I abandoned my property. They lied, and while I was defending my country, they stole my home. The room fell silent for a moment. Quentin's words landed heavy. Even those who had told their own stories leaned in, reminded that this wasn't just about money or rules. It was about dignity. Afterward, Louis caught Quentin in the hallway. You're turning into the face of this fight. Louis said people are looking at you like their voice. Quentin shook his head. I didn't ask for that. You didn't have to. It's yours now. Meanwhile, across town, Sylvia sat stiffly in her office chair. Watching the board members argue among themselves, Curtis Doyle had finally cracked. This is getting out of control, Curtis said, slamming a folder onto the table. We can't keep pretending this is business as usual. There are too many eyes on us now. Calm yourself, Sylvia snapped. The courts have upheld us before. They'll do it again. Unless you'd like to confess to wrongdoing. Curtis's face went pale. I'm not confessing to anything. But I'm not going down with this ship either. Cheryl Masters leaned forward. If someone flips, we're finished. Sylvia adjusted her glasses, her voice cool. No one flips. Anyone who thinks otherwise should remember. They signed the same papers we all did. Curtis swallowed hard. He knew exactly what she meant. Back at the courthouse, Captain Whitfield gathered her notes. We have enough to move forward. Next step is filing a federal complaint. That will freeze further HOA actions until a judge reviews everything. Quentin felt a measure of relief. But it was short-lived. As he left the courthouse, a man he didn't recognize approached him near his truck. The man wore a ball cap pulled low and kept his voice quiet. You'd better back off, soldier, the man said. You're stirring trouble that doesn't concern you anymore. People are getting nervous. Nervous people do desperate things. Quentin stared at him, unblinking. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to warn you, the man muttered before walking off. Quentin stood there for a long moment, the Texas sun beating down, heat and tension mixing in his chest. He knew this was no longer just about paperwork and legal arguments. Sylvia was pulling strings. And some of those strings were tied to people willing to play dirty. That night, Emma found her brother pacing the porch of her house. What happened? She asked. Someone tried to warn me off. Emma crossed her arms and I'm not backing down. Quentin said, his voice was low, steady. They took our father's land. They preyed on families who couldn't fight back if they think I'll scare easy. They picked the wrong man. Emma's eyes softened. Then you'd better be ready because people like Sylvia don't fight fair. Quentin looked out into the dark Texas fields, fireflies flickering in the distance. He could feel the weight of what was coming, but beneath it was steel. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every family wronged by that board, for every soldier who deserved to come home to the life they left behind. But while Quentin steeled himself for the battles ahead, Sylvia was already setting her sights on the courtroom, and she was prepared to use every weapon at her disposal. No matter the cost, the courthouse in Fort Worth was buzzing the morning the first hearing was scheduled. Reporters loitered on the steps, microphones in hand, eager for a soundbite. Local news stations had picked up the story of the Army staff sergeant who came home to find his ranch sold out from under him by now. The scandal had grown larger than Quentin could have imagined inside the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Quentin sat at the plaintiff's table with Captain Renee Whitfield beside him, her briefcase neatly stacked with documents and affidavits from homeowners across the aisle. Sylvia Brenner sat tall, her expression icy, her attorneys flanking her like sentinels. The judge entered, stern, efficient, and the room rose before settling again. Captain Whitfield opened with calm precision. Your Honor, this case is not about a single home. It's about an abuse of power that targeted multiple families under false pretenses. Staff Sergeant Quentin Ralston was deployed overseas, fulfilling his duty to this country when his property was wrongfully foreclosed upon by the Homeowners Association. LED by Mrs. Brenner. We will present evidence showing that not only was his account current, but several other families suffered the same fraudulent tactics. Sylvia's lead attorney countered smoothly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone used to winning. Your Honor, the HOA followed all proper channels. Mr. Ralston failed to meet his obligations as a homeowner. Our records clearly document unpaid dues, violations, and a lawful foreclosure process. This is not fraud. It is enforcement of community standards. Quentin clenched his fists under the table. He wanted to stand up and shout, but Captain Whitfield placed a steady hand on his arm. Patience, she whispered. One by one, witnesses were called. Franklin Ortega took the stand first, describing in detail how he was hit with sudden fees and penalties that snowballed into foreclosure. Patrice Nolan followed, her voice shaking, as she explained how Sylvia herself threatened her family with legal action if they didn't comply. Then came the Holbrooks, their testimony painting a picture of confusion and helplessness. As they were railroaded through a process they barely understood, Sylvia sat stone-faced through it all, occasionally whispering to her attorney but never losing her composure. Finally, it was Quentin's turn. He stood, walked to the witness stand, and swore in his voice carried a steady weight as he told his story. The deployment, the bills paid before he left, the shock of finding strangers in his home. I served 11 months in Kuwait, Quentin said, locking eyes with the judge. I was protecting this country, and I came back to find my father's land stolen, everything I worked for. Everything he built gone, and not because I failed, but because someone decided my absence made me an easy target. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment. During cross-examination, Sylvia's attorney tried to shake him. Mr. Ralston, can you prove beyond a doubt that you paid every single bill before you left? Quentin didn't flinch. Yes. The receipts are in the folder you're holding. The attorney pressed again. And yet, isn't it possible you simply forgot something? Given the stress of deployment, Quentin's jaw tightened. I never forgot my responsibilities. Not to my unit and not to my home. The judge intervened before the attorney could push further. By the end of the day, the judge announced a temporary injunction. All HOA foreclosures tied to Sylvia's board were suspended pending a full investigation. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a crack in Sylvia's fortress. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed Quentin. Microphones and cameras shoved toward him. Questions. Flying Staff Sergeant, how does it feel to finally face Mrs. Brenner in court? Do you believe you'll get your ranch back? Do you think the HOA committed fraud on a larger scale? Quentin paused at the top of the steps. He wasn't a man who sought the spotlight, but this wasn't about him anymore. This fight isn't just mine. He said it's about every family that's been pushed around by people who thought they were too small to matter. We're going to see this through the cameras. Flashed reporters scribbled furiously, and somewhere in the crowd, Sylvia Brenner watched with narrowed eyes, her lips pressed thin. But what Quentin didn't yet realize was that Sylvia had allies outside the courtroom. People with money and influence who weren't about to let her empire collapse without a fight. The week after the injunction felt like a blur. Calls came in from newspapers across Texas. And even a few national outlets wanted Quentin's story. Soldiers reached out through social media. Veterans groups voiced support, and neighbors he barely knew offered a handshake or a pat on the back. But with every new show of solidarity, the pressure grew heavier. One evening, Quentin sat on the porch of his sister Emma's house, phone buzzing nonstop. She set down 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside him. "You're becoming the face of this whole thing." Emma said. "I never wanted that," Quentin admitted, staring out into the yard. "I just wanted my ranch back. Doesn't matter. People see you standing up to Brenner, and they're rallying behind you. You can't turn away now." Quentin rubbed the back of his neck. "I know. But it feels like the more people I represent, the more I've got to lose if this goes wrong." Emma's voice softened. "That's exactly why you can't let it go wrong," while Quentin wrestled with the weight of responsibility. Sylvia Brenner was far from idle. She knew the courtroom had shifted momentum against her. And the Ralston name was plastered across every headline, but she still had leverage. Friends in high places, deep pockets, and an old network of county officials who had benefited from her HOA's control. Late one night, Sylvia sat in her study with her attorney, Mark Talbot. The room smelled of leather and oak polish. Shelves lined with law books. "She never read This Soldier is Making You Into a Villain," Talbot said, tapping his finger on a newspaper spread across the desk. "If this keeps up, public opinion will sway the courts we can't afford, that then shift the narrative." Sylvia replied sharply. "Make him look unstable, a hothead fresh back from war." "Not thinking clearly, people will believe it." Tolbert hesitated. "That's risky." "Everything is risky," Sylvia snapped, "but perception wins cases just as much as facts. You know that within days, whispers began to circulate. Anonymous posts online questioned Quentin's mental stability. A blog claimed he had a history of violent behavior. Local gossip painted him as aggressive, impossible to reason with. Quentin ignored it at first. But when an old acquaintance stopped him in town and asked if he was doing okay after everything overseas, he realized the smear campaign was working. He stormed into Luis Navarro's office, slamming the door behind him. "They're trying to paint me as unhinged," Quentin said, his voice low but burning. "They're dragging my service through the mud." Louis leaned back in his chair. "That's Brenna's playbook. If she can't beat you with rules, she'll beat you with rumors. She's messing with the wrong man." Louise sighed. "Don't take the bait. The worst thing you can do right now is give her a reason to say she's right. Keep calm. Let Whitfield handle it." Quentin paced the office. Fists clenched. He wanted to fight back, to shout the truth from every rooftop. But Louise was right. Losing his temper would only feed their narrative. That night, Captain Whitfield called. "I heard about the rumors," she said. "Stay focused. We're filing for discovery next week. Which means we'll start pulling their internal records. If Brenner's been manipulating finances, we'll find it. That's how we win. Not through gossip, but proof." Quentin exhaled slowly. "Proof. That's all I need." Still, doubt gnawed at him. He thought about the families who had trusted him, about the Holbrooks and Patrice Nolan, about Franklin Ortega staring into his coffee cup. Like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. They were counting on him. If Sylvia's tactics worked, all of them would lose again. Back at Sylvia's house, she poured herself another glass of wine and listened to the hum of her phone buzzing with updates from Talbot. The smear campaign was spreading. But despite the headlines, a part of her felt unease. For the first time, she had underestimated Quentin. Ralston, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was pulling the whole community.